discussing so far. So little bit discussion about machines, then some discussion about control. These kind of things we will do now. So almost 25 or more than 25 lectures we have completed. And to say like today, let us say is the 26th lecture. So more than half we have completed. So let us learn some more things. If you have any doubts, anything related to the previous things, previous content what we have covered, you can always come back and ask. Fine?
Sir, I want to ask something.
A little louder, Akib, actually.
Sir, I want to ask something.
Little louder.
Sir, I have a confusion. I want to ask something, sir.
You want?
I want to ask a question, sir.
Yes, please ask.
Sir, sir, you have said if we increase number of pulse, it will be considered as a good PWM converter.
Yes.
Right, sir. Sir,
yes.
My question is how long we can increase the number of pulse? There should be an upper limit also, na?
Yes, of course.
Actually, it should be based on the devices we are using. Means like if we use IGBT, it is a very fast switching device. But there is a problem with IGBT is that it has a very low power rating.
Okay.
So I mean, how to choose about
Just 1 second, I will switch off my fan. It's making too much noise actually. Just 1 second, please hold on. Okay, so this is good question. And perhaps in the previous assignment when I asked you to select the IGBT and all, this was the purpose which I wanted you to explore. So some people misunderstood the on/off as the EMF. So that is not EMF, that was your energy loss during the turn on and turn off. So yes, of course, when we say like we keep increasing the pulse number, so our current THD is going down, so our quality of the current is improving. That is true. That is fine, right? But there must be upper limit. That is what you are saying. And yes, of course it is. Because as we are increasing our pulse number, our switching frequency is going higher. And so our power loss because of the switching, so which is called switching energy loss. This is going higher and higher. Now we have a device which is operating in saturation mode and then cutoff mode. So in these two modes, when it is conducting saturation or cutoff, let's say this is the voltage. So let's say if I take the IV characteristic, probably that is better. So when we say device has, let's say, either this operating point somewhere on the V axis or somewhere on the I axis. These are the axes on which this will operate. So our operating point could be here or it could be here. So when it is here, that is where we say it is in cutoff zone, which means it is blocking. The device is off. And here the device is on. So in both these states, we have very less energy loss. That is called the conduction loss or the cutoff or off state loss. In both these states, the energy loss is very, very small. It can be ignored in many of the cases. But the transition which is happening from one state to another state, this is causing a lot of power loss, which is our switching frequency loss or switching energy loss. That is happening on account of how many times we are switching. So every time device take a transition from off to on, the voltage is changing something like this, and current may actually jump immediately. So we have some amount of loss associated with this transition during this TTR, the transition time. And as you keep on increasing your switching frequency, this keep on going higher and higher. Now what this will do to the IGBT? When the loss is happening within the IGBT, its junction temperature is going to go up. Now either we have a big heat sink connected with the IGBT which can take off this heat. So we have a big heat sink, let us say, on which we have fixed our IGBT. So this is capable of taking out all the whatever power loss here it is happening. Then the junction temperature will remain within the limits so that the device is not destroyed. But if we do not have sufficient capability to remove this power or the heat which is getting dissipated, then ultimately this will go beyond the limits of the junction temperature and then device will get damaged. This is where our limit on the pulse number or the switching frequency comes. If you have the capability, infinite capability to cool down the device, then there is no limit. You can go on for any switching frequency. So that is why when we have this, some of the modern devices which are called wide bandgap devices, let's say silicon carbide or GaN or something, these kind of devices, they have very small E-on and E-off. So that is why they can go, and very small transition time also. So that is why they can go for very high switching frequency compared to the traditional silicon IGBTs, what we have. So that's the reason when we go for these kind of devices, our switching frequency will be like somewhere close to 50 kilohertz or maybe more. Whereas here it is restricted to 10 kilohertz or lesser for a reasonable power level. So you understand the gap where we are. You understand the constraint, right, where we have to operate in. That is why I say the maximum possible pulse number. Maximum possible for the system. Whatever system you have. System means the heat sink, IGBT, converter, everything combined. For that, the maximum possible pulse number. Is that clear now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So previous assignment when you did searching the practical IGBT which will be useful for that converter. So it had basically three things. One, your voltage rating should be matched. Then your current rating should be matched. And secondly, your thermal rating. So that is where I asked for just mentioning what is E-on and E-off, the energy loss in the device per transition. So that gives an estimate about how much switching energy loss you are going to have in the device or in the system. So these three things we need to satisfy whenever we are designing any converter. Our voltage rating for the device must be matched, current rating, and then the energy loss. So of course, with some percentage of margin must also be there. If our requirement is 1200 volt, we cannot take a 1200 volt IGBT and operate this. We cannot do. This is not possible. There are some more things which are associated with the voltage of the IGBT. That is why we give some percentage of margin, sometimes 25%, sometimes 50%, depends on what is our level of safety. And similar for current also, there must be some percentage of margin. Understanding?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, anything else?
Sir, how do we decide the factor of safety, sir? Means it is pre-decided or based on our practical system we decide the factor of safety?
Correct. So many a times when you are designing some industry product, the industry itself will say that, okay, for all our products, the safety margin is 25% at least. So that is the particular industry standard. Sometimes let's say to whom you are providing the converter, who is your the agency to whom which you are providing, let us say if it is Indian Railways who has asked you to design the converter and provide it, then they will fix that, okay, what percentage of safety margin they want. So particularly for Indian Railways, they always say, okay, we want 50% of safety margin. Then all the vendors must comply to that. 50% of safety margin.
Okay, sir.
So it is our customer sometimes who dictates what they want. Correct? But definitely we must have some bare minimum level of safety margin, always. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Any more thing? Fine. Is that fine?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
So now let us start today's lecture, where I think most of you would be very happy to do something like this. This is all everyone's favorite topic whenever it comes to machine reluctance and all that. So yeah, we all have studied it during our bachelor's and other courses. So good. Let us do a bit of this. Let us understand the BH curve again little bit, and then we will go for different machines which we are going to deal with and how to design the power electronic converter, what control methodology we should have. These kind of things we will discuss little bit. Now, simple question, if let us say someone gives you this kind of magnetic core and it has some coil wound around it, and someone asks, okay, tell me the magnetic flux density in this core, or tell me the field intensity in this core. So what will be your general answer? How do you feel it can be solved? You all have done this, right? This is not new. Yes, Pooja, you are saying something.
So MMF by mean core length,
Mean
NI
core
by LC.
or something else. Okay, so another term we have got the MMF. What else we can do? And of course, it is defined as N into I. So what else we can do if we have to solve for these quantities for this particular core? What options do we have?
The flux will be same, sir.
Yeah, flux will be same, okay, but what will be the flux?
MMF for reluctance.
MMF for reluctance,
For
sir.
reluctance.
So another term we are getting the reluctance. Now, what makes you give all these answers? What is the assumption or what is the understanding you have about this system that is kind of encouraging you to give these answers? That okay, we know this is the flux, MMF by reluctance, but what is it that is giving you the confidence that okay, yes, this can solve my problem?
Ignoring saturation.
Okay, that is another term, ignoring saturation.
Leakage is also, sir, ignored.
Leakage is also less. Now we are going into different terms every time. Every time we need to give some answer, we have a different term to define to cover up our answer or justify our answer. Okay, what else?
Sir, we know the parameters of this core through which reluctance are calculated.
Which parameter?
L means length, area.
Okay, length,
With the help
area,
of and permeability.
permeability.
With the help of this reluctance is calculated.
Correct. But what gives you this confidence that okay, if we know these things, we can surely tell what is the flux? How do you know this is correct? Just because you have read it is correct? Or there is something which is giving you the confidence that okay, this is correct?
So, BH curve, sir.
Okay, BH curve, another thing has come up. So is BH curve giving you confidence that this is correct, whatever you are doing?
Sir, Actually, it is a very analogous to the electrical system and follow the Ohm's law. So that's
Correct.
why we are saying that yes, it will be
It
helpful.
is analogous to the electrical system V equal to IR.
Exactly, sir. That's give confidence that yes, it can be correct.
Good, good, good. All these answers are correct, but you know the fundamental thing which all of you are missing is there are some assumptions which we have taken when we try to solve this circuit like this and when we give some answers like this. What are the fundamental assumptions? So this is not correct for every case, right? If let us say I put one single turn of coil over here, current, can you tell what is the flux in this? Is this equation valid now? A single turn coil, then what you will go for?
The Ampere circuital law.
Correct. New thing has come up. What is happening? Why it is changing every time? There must be certain things. See, from Ampere circuital law to Biot-Savart law to all that, this all must be correlating somewhere, no? What is that thing which is giving the answers for everything? Somewhere for coil you are going for Ampere circuital law, somewhere for Biot. So if I have a length of wire, then how will you compute the magnetic field? What is that which is governing all these situations?
Faraday's law, sir.
Okay, another thing has come up, Faraday's law. Of course, Faraday's law is there, but what is Faraday's law? Is it for a single coil?
No, sir. Sir, Gauss's law?
Wow.
Gauss's.
So what is Gauss's law? What is Gauss's law? What is Gaussian surface? How do we define this is correct? So, in any general electromagnetic phenomena or in any electromagnetic circuit, if we have to solve, all these things are true in their own range of operation. These things are individually correct. Whenever you have to do for electrostatic analysis, Gaussian law we can apply. Then for a single coil we can have Ampere circuital law. For length of wire we can have Biot-Savart law. These things are independently correct for their own scenario. But if we have to unify all these things, any phenomena which is happening at any electromagnetic level, so that is where we go for our Maxwell equations, which we solve. So Maxwell has given very simple 4 equations. To say it is simple, but to solve it is very complicated. And this is one unified way in which whatever scenario you are given, you can solve and know what is the required quantity at a given condition or in a given condition. So what is Maxwell law? What are the Maxwell equations? So if I state all these equations, the first one I will write as surface integral of E dot ds. This is what? Any guess?
Field density.
Charge enclosed divided by the permittivity. Now the second, if you say surface integral of the flux density, what it is?
0.
0. Then these are the surface integrals. When we say any closed loop integral or closed integral over a surface, which means if let us say this is a cube, then we are considering all the surfaces of this cube. That is the meaning of closed surface. Or if it is a sphere, we are considering all the surfaces of the sphere or cylinder or whatever. So that is the meaning of closed surface. Now there is something called closed contour. Contour means we are going on a path which is closed. So here, this is defined like this. What it means, if you go around a closed contour, the electric field intensity is like negative of what is the rate of change of flux over there with the surface associated with that contour. And similarly, we have magnetic field intensity also defined like this over a closed contour, which is this. You all know very well, right? Everyone has studied. Now, what are the assumptions which we take when we try to solve any electromagnetic system for particularly our interest range, let us say machine or transformer or inductor, these kind of systems when we solve, what assumptions do we take? So the assumptions what we take is that this term, which is also known as displacement current, is zero. There is no displacement current flowing in our system, which means we are ignoring any interturn capacitance in our system. So we ignore this, and then if we have to solve a magnetostatic situation, so these two equations are sufficient to solve any problem. Integral of B dot ds over a closed surface is 0, and integral of H dot dl over a closed contour is equal to I enclosed. And from material property, we know that our B and H are related like this, where mu is the permeability of the system or permeability of the material. Now this is true for any scenario, whether you take a point system and solve this, or you take a macro system, let's say a bigger system, inductor or some kind of motor. No, for all these systems, these three equations are correct. Now when we have to solve for something like a core, which we have done earlier, for a system like this, if you have to solve and you have to use these equations and solve, then what will happen at every point on this core and in the surrounding, you need to solve these equations. And that is where we cannot do it analytically. We need to go for some methods like finite element method or boundary element method, these kind of things. So there we solve at every point, and then what resultant vector we get, that we plot. But there are certain assumptions apart from that, okay, these equations are valid for this scenario, and then something more which we know from our experience. And what that experience says is that in a scenario like this, first assumption what we take, that core length is uniform, which means it is not changing. Let's say if you come to the innermost surface and you go to the outermost surface, the length is not changing. That is our assumption. So the variation may be there practically, but what we assume that, okay, there is some mean length which we will take and solve our equation. This is the first assumption. The second assumption is the area of the core. This is also not changing throughout, which means a uniform core we are having. This is fairly reasonable. We can make such things, such cores. So these two assumptions are there about the core. The third thing which we all know, but probably we don't know that this is very important factor for solving our equations, is that in a system like this, all our flux lines are confined within this core. The flux is confined within this course for a given system like this, and anything going out, like say any flux line going out, is very minimal. This can be ignored. So all our flux lines is confined within the core. This is another assumption. And this happens only when we have permeability of the material much higher than the permeability of the air. Permeability means it is kind of indication that the material or the system is ready to accept more and more flux. So this is another important assumption which we have when we try to solve these kind of systems. Now we know what we are going to do. We are having a uniform flux flowing in this core, which is having a uniform mean length and uniform area. This is what we are going to solve. So then you can apply these two equations. So if you take closed surface for the flux density, then it will always be 0. But if you take an open surface and you integrate, which means all the flux lines, let us say, crossing through this surface. So what will be that? That will be the total flux passing through the surface. This is our first thing. Then the second, where we go for closed contour integration of this H dot dl, that is simply we know that it is I enclosed, which is what we say our total number of turns into the number of, the current flowing into each turn. So if let us say this red is your closed path, then the current enclosed within this red path is your N into I. So this is what we also call as MMF, the magnetomotive force, and then we get this equation. Now here H, and we have mean length of LC, so this is fairly equal to this. And then the next, so here we can write V dot ds is equal to B into AC equal to phi. And the third equation, B equal to mu H, this can correlate these two things also. So finally what we will get, so this quantity what is coming over there, this is what we define as reluctance of the core. Sorry, opposite of that. It should be phi into R. So this quantity we define as reluctance, and inverse of that is actually defined as permeance. So AC into mu by LC. So this is how simply we can take these assumptions and we can solve our equations. Now we know all the parameters within this system. So we have number of turns, we have the current, we have the core length, core area, and then the permeability of the material. So we can solve what is the flux density or what is the flux flowing into the core. And of course, we have the assumption that something is not getting saturated. So that we will see later. Now this is how we can solve. So this is what we say is pretty analogous to our B equal to IR famous equation, where F can be correlated with V and flux can be correlated with I, which means flux is a continuous quantity. So, and it is confined to that particular circuit or particular magnetic core. So then we can give a simplified circuit form or a single equation form to our magnetic circuit like this. So this is what we say is like our equivalent magnetic circuit for the core and how we can solve for the value of flux. And it is uniform at every point. The flux density is uniform at every point. So we need not worry about the corners and all. But if we want exact solution, then this cannot give exact solution of flux density at each point of the core. That is where we need to go for more sophisticated methods such as finite element method and all. This is clear? Okay. This is fairly simple, right? Only I am putting together all your thoughts or your assumptions what you had previously, but maybe you did not give a proper thinking to that. Isn't it? This is what all you knew previously. Now, let me take another scenario. Where I have some air gap introduced in the core. Now what will happen? What can we do? This should be simple, right? What can we do now? Again, we compute the reluctance of the circuit. And we know what is the MMF. Then we can compute what is the flux. But what is the reluctance of this core? There are two parts. One is this magnetic path, and then something where we have air in between. No magnetic material. So simply like how we had this previous circuit drawn, we can have two parts in the reluctance. Let's say R1 plus R2, and the circuit can be drawn as this. So R1 corresponds to the reluctance offered by this iron core part. So we know this is given by this, and R2 is what the air length is offering the resistance. Let us say this length is Lg something. So this can be Lg by Ag into mu 0. So this difference what we get in reluctance. And when we say what is the flux flowing into the core, then it can be simply written as this. This is simple. Now again, if you compare these two reluctances which are coming over there, so what you will find, R1, which is something like Lc by Ac times of mu, and R2, which is Lg by Ag times of mu 0. So AC and Ag we can take comparable because it is the same core, and we assume that the area is not changing, which means very nicely we have cut the core. There is no deformity over there. So then these two are same, and mu is basically can be represented as mu r into mu 0. What is mu r?
Relative permeability.
Relative permeability.
Correct. So where the number of for the mu r could be something like 1000 to some 4000 or something like that for the materials which we use in our transformer or motor and such things, isn't it? Now the core length Lc and Lg are also associated with the system what we are having. So what we find that this R1 is having a big factor which is in the denominator. So always R1 is going to be very, very small compared to R2. So many a times when we have to solve such circuits and we have the condition where this kind of inequality is met, so what we can do, our reluctance can be simply represented as R2, and that simplifies our computation. So now this can be simply written as this. This is your flux. Understanding my point? These are certain assumptions which we have when we try to solve this. But here, one thing we need to keep in mind that the air gap, there is a limit on how much it can be. So if let us say this is your core limb and this is your air gap Lg. So the area associated with these core limbs, if let us say that is AC, then your Lg must be insignificant compared to the root of AC. So you cannot have Lg something no, which is like 10 times of root of AC. This is where it will be invalid. Why it will be invalid? The flux lines which are traveling from one part to another part, which are going like this, when you have this kind of condition, they have lesser tendency to take any path outside this area. This is called the fringing effect, right? This you all know. So if you are meeting this condition, the fringing effect is lesser, which means we are not having this kind of phenomena too often. Maybe few lines, maybe if you take the density of 100 lines per centimeter square or per mm square, maybe some couple of lines or maybe 4 or 5 lines are going out of the core. But almost all the flux lines are confined within this area, and that is what we say when we have this condition. So fringing effect is not too high when we have this kind of condition, and this is where this assumption is again correct. And which is the scenario when we have our machines, the air gap is very, very small. So we ignore any fringing effect over there. We assume that fairly the flux is moving from stator to rotor in a very uniform path. So another important thing what we are understanding over here, that if we have a magnetic material, let us say a core like this, what we are having, then we have the ability to decide how the flux is going to flow or which shape this flux lines will take. Now, some of the machines which have, let us say, the stator, this some winding is there, and then some rotor, this thing pole is there. So flux lines are very much confined. They move like this, enclosed contours like this. So we can shape our flux according to our will if we have these kind of magnetic materials or ferromagnetic materials with high permeability. This is another strength what we have, and that is how we can make our machines operate in the manner we want. So we can have different shapes, different orientations in which our magnetic circuit will work because of this property. We have the freedom to shape our flux lines according to our need. Understanding my point? So we can force the flux lines to start from one part of the core and end in another part of the core. End means going in a loop, but crossing, let us say, another coil, or let us say another moving part, all these things we can dictate because of this property. Correct? Now let us understand some more things about our system. So let's say when we define these equations and quantities, and we know there is some flux associated with that. So of course, whenever there is time varying flux, there is some EMF attached with that, defined by this. So which equation is this?
Maxwell.
Hmm?
Faraday laws. Faraday's.
Faraday law.
Yes. So now here it comes. So then we can correlate our quantities or whichever magnetic circuit we had in terms of electrical circuit. By correlating, we mean what? We can define quantities to solve all these things in terms of an electrical circuit. So let's say we have a coil and we are giving some voltage V over here. So of course there will be some current flowing, and then there will be some flux associated with that, and that will give rise to some EMF across the coil. Correct? Now, if there are, let's say, n terms, the total flux what is associated with this coil, that is called flux linkage, is n times of the phi. Now, in circuit, we know that we can very easily correlate this V and the EMF E through our KVL, which is like V equal to E, and this can further be defined as d by dt of lambda. Now this flux linkage, whatever is there. Now this is how we are correlated. So which means there are some more quantities which we are having in terms of our electrical circuit. Now, lambda or flux linkage is something which we cannot measure very easily. What we can measure is current or some property of the circuit, let's say resistance. Then we know inductance. So now we need to define those things in terms of our magnetic circuit or the configuration of the magnetic circuit. So this is how what we do. So flux linkage, we know what is N into phi, and we have solved for phi as the MMF by the reluctance, and MMF we know it is Ni, and reluctance we know it is Lg, or whatever, let's say Lc. There is no air gap times of AC into mu naught mu r, simply mu. So then this is coming something like N square AC mu by Lc. Times of I. So you see, this flux linkage can be divided into two parts. Of course, when there is no current, there is no flux, there is no flux linkage. But if there is flux linkage, that is not only because of the current, it is because of something else also. There are few number of turns over there. There is some surface area confined by those, and there is some magnetic permeability because of the material over there, some length associated with that. So both the things are actually defining how the flux linkage would be. One thing is purely dependent on your excitation, what you are giving to the core, and one thing is actually the property of the magnetic circuit. So this property which we are getting on account of our magnetic circuit, this we define as our inductance. So that is why we say lambda is equal to L into I, where L is purely your magnetic circuit property. It is nothing to do with your excitation unless you are going into saturation where mu starts changing, which we will discuss later. So for fairly linear materials or linear range of operation, this is true, and this is how we define the inductance. Now our things are simple. So our KVL we can write as V equal to E, which can be written as d lambda by dt, and which can be written as d Li by dt. So for a generic circuit, what we can have both L and I variable. So then we can write either L di by dt or plus I dl by dt. This is the generic form. Now, in some of the circuits, we may have L value constant. So let us say when we have fixed air gap length, or let us say no length, but the L value is fixed, the core is fixed, geometry is fixed, then we don't have this dl by dt term over there. So then we will have only L di by dt giving our voltage. And in some cases, let us say if we maintain our current constant, then we will have the voltage generated on account of only dl by dt. So different machines operate on different principles. So when you talk about transformer, it is purely L di by dt, nothing else. There is no change in L. We are not going into saturation. But for a moving part machine, let us say reluctance motor or something else, we have L varying. So there we try to keep our I constant. So then this principle operates over there. Getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So this is how it comes. Now, if let us say we have multiple windings in a system, how do we define our inductance? This is just for your understanding, some background I am giving. One coil is here, another coil is here. So let's say current I1 is flowing into this number of turns N1, current I2 is flowing into this number of turns N2, and this is the core where this area is AC and the core length is LC and all that, everything is defined. Now, how do we define inductance for two coils? And of course, it is the property of the system, the magnetic circuit. So then let us try to write our MMF. So MMF will basically be sum of these two MMFs given by the two coils. Now our reluctance is what? Is nothing but L by mu times of AC, or if you use subscript C, LC by mu AC. So we know the flux associated will be F by R, and so we can write our flux linkage for each coil. The flux is common. Flux which is flowing in this core, that is common, which is phi. But the flux linkage is property of the coil. So for coil 1, the flux linkage lambda 1 will be defined like N1 into phi. And for coil 2, it will be defined like N2 into phi. Now, if you expand, plug in all these values, so what you will find that L1 will have two parts. So one will be, if I write it completely first, and here lambda 2 you will write like the same thing, whatever flux is there, there is no change in that. Mu into AC. Now you can see the two parts can be separated out here for both the flux linkages. So one will be something like N1 square mu 0 AC by Lg times of I1, plus another would be N1 N2 mu 0 AC by Lg times of I2. And similarly for lambda 2 also you can write two terms. So what we see over here, the two parts, one is related to I1, which is the current in the coil itself, and another is related to the current in the second coil. So these are defined as self and mutual inductances. So when we say L11, which means the inductance of this coil 1 on account of the complete geometry. So that will be N1 square mu 0 AC by LC. Whereas the mutual inductance L12 would be N1 N2. It will be dependent on both number of turns, N1 and N2, pi Lg. Similarly, you can define for L22, that will be N2 square mu 0 AC by LC, and L21 will be N1 N2 mu 0 AC by Lg. So always we are going to have L12 equal to L21 because this is property of the geometry. It is not dependent on the excitation or anything unless we are going into saturation. So this is how we define the inductances for different, for the system where we have multiple coils. Correct? This is fine, right? Now,
Yes, sir.
let us say something. If we discuss about, we have been saying that the excitation, what we are having and what output we are getting because of that. So this is something which relates our material to how we are seeing it. Let's say when we say V is equal to mu H for a material. So is this mu constant? Practically, is this constant or it's varying?
Constant, sir.
Constant for what? Let's
Property of
say
material.
we take air. So for air, mu 0 is very well defined. There is no equation for it. It is very well defined. It's a constant number. So this means what? If you have this BH curve, So the BH curve for air will be basically a line, which means what? As you keep on increasing your excitation, which is H, we will keep on getting some flux density in air, and the slope of the line is very, very small, which means for a reasonable amount of flux density, we need to give large amount of excitation. This is because of low value of mu naught, that is the absolute value. Now, when we talk about some magnetic materials which have permeability something like mu r into mu naught, then what happens? Suddenly the slope of the curve increases. It goes higher, it's more steep, meaning what? For the same flux density, for achieving the same flux density, now you need to give a much smaller excitation. Understanding my point? This is because of the relative permeability, which is very, very high for a magnetic material compared to air. Now, for air, there is no limit for Bg how much you can have. No, it will have that value. Only problem is we need to have very, very high value of Hg for achieving that Bg value or the flux density value. Whereas for a practical core, it increases with increase in the excitation, the flux density increases, but after a certain limit, the curve starts flattening and slowly it becomes parallel to what the air, this permeability is mu naught. The slope becomes parallel over there. So which means what? Beyond a certain limit, there is no appreciable change in V for a given value of H. If you take delta H from here to here, from point 1 to point 2, there is significant change in value of V. But if you take these 2 points over here, let's say 3 and 4, the change in value of V is very, very small. So this is where we say we have started going into saturation. So in saturation, actually what is happening, because if B and mu are related like this, and we keep on increasing H and B is remaining at the same point, which means what? Our mu is coming down. So our mu is changing in the saturation zone. Understanding my point? This is the property of the magnetic material. So in linear range, mu will be fixed and hence your inductance associated with that circuit. But the moment you start going into saturation zone or saturation region, your mu starts to change. It started reducing. So your inductance will also change suddenly. Correct? So that is where you may start seeing some very different current waveform for a given sinusoidal excitation if you go for saturation region. So that is why all the machines and everything, they are all operated below the saturation level. We never go there because then the property of the machine itself starts changing. We will have no understanding about what L is going to be. So all our control or our equations, everything will go invalid. Correct? This is fine?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's stop over here and we will start from here in the next class. So we will understand a little bit more about the BH curve for a magnetic material and then the BH curve for the magnet. So how these two are different or how the magnet operates. So these things we will understand in the next class and then we will sequentially start our switch reluctance motor and its control. Fine. Any questions?
No.
Any quick question you can ask now? Is this fine?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Let's just stop here. Thank you. We will meet tomorrow then at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.